Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. As you can see, I have taken my work home with me. Two notes, points of interest. One is a discussion topic, but the first is our schedule, which has changed for today. So don't get up early, don't stay up late. We will not be broadcasting at our usual time this evening, as today is the U.S. Memorial Day holiday, and none of us will be in. Rest assured, if you're looking to buy, trade, or sell, we are still answering the phone from home. So if you're abroad, we'll be back to our schedule tomorrow. If you are domestic in the United States, please observe a somber and respectful Memorial Day. We'll be back soon. Quick question and a quick program from our friend Bobby R. Bobby R is asking, Tim, can you discuss some misconceptions about watch service? I certainly can. First, and you can see that this is my watchmaking atelier slash kitchen slash strategy bunker slash storeroom slash pet pig sitting abode. But the first big conception about watch service is this notion of a partial overhaul. This is a myth that won't die, but for practical purposes, think of it as bad watchmaking and a raw deal. You can partially service a watch in as much as you would partially change a diaper. It's going to leave you with a big mess on your hands. So the root of the idea is that you can quickly re-oil the balance staff and the escapement, drop those parts back into the watch, and it'll function at some acceptable level. The problem is this overlooks several of the major purposes of an overhaul. The first of which is to completely disassemble the watch, clean all the parts, and check them for defects. And by the nature of the partial overhaul, pulling the balance and the escapement and throwing them back in, you're not checking the train wheels, you're not checking the end shake, which is the, for want of a better term, the level that the jewels are sunken into their respective bridges and plates. You're not checking the power source, the mainspring barrel, and if it's an automatic watch, you're not checking the winding system. You're also not checking the motion works, which governs the motion of the hands, and the setting system that governs the motion works. You're not checking the keyless works, which governs the clutch functions of the crown. So you're leaving a lot of material uninspected, not just unserviced, but you're letting it continue to wear, which would be like, again, basically changing half the oil in your car, changing the oil but not the filter, or half changing a diaper. You're not getting anything for your money because you're going to wind up with problems related to those components that weren't inspected, weren't cleaned, weren't readjusted, and it might be that you've got a genuine problem in some other part of the watch that required you to take it in for service in the first place. So it may be that there was nothing wrong with your balance staff and escapement. You had a power source problem, or you dropped the watch, one of the train jewels moved, and it jammed the drivetrain. Like, I've seen all sorts of problems. The only way to suss out what's wrong with the watch is to fully tear down, clean, and inspect, and that's part of a standard overhaul. That's one of the many reasons why you should never accept a partial overhaul, and any watchmaker who's trying to sell you a partial overhaul is at some level trying to hustle you. So no, partial overhauls, best practices, they don't coincide. Now, another thing, independent brand watches will not be serviceable down the line, either because you won't be able to get some proprietary part or because the knowledge to work on them will vanish with their originators. Well, this isn't true. It's true that there are some highly proprietary watches out there. I would recommend that in the year 2060 you not drop your HYT. Good advice. On the other hand, there are a lot of brands like Zeitwinkel and FP Journe and Habring and Nomos, where you don't really have to worry about these watches being serviceable down the line. Standard cleaning, oiling, and adjustment can keep them going for a long time, and if a metal part, something made of steel or brass, breaks, in general, good craftsmen, and there are plenty of them out there, should be able to fabricate that one part if that's what you need, but it's not that common. In general, the three most sought components I see for watches that go in for services, they are hands, case seals, and crystals. And there are already aftermarket suppliers for crystals of brands still in production and brands past. And I can see down the road, 5 to 10 years, 3D printing making case seals available for almost any watch ever made. In terms of hands, as with all things, there's a will, there's a way. But most of the time, there's enough OEM new old stock hanging around that if you're willing to find the supplier, you will be able to replace something like a hand. So again, those are the major issues. Those are the parts that are always sought. Those and OEM straps. So you may have to get a whatever, Laurent Ferrier strap in 50 years. I can't say for sure. But I'm pretty certain that the Laurent Ferrier galet will still be serviceable in all its forms. Now, let's talk a little bit about quartz movements being disposable. That's another misconception, that quartz movements are just popped out and thrown out and replaced when they go in for service. It is true that some watches built by lower end brands, your Tissot, your Longines, they're not low end watches, but the movements themselves might be intended for pop and replace at the factory, which means pre-serviced replacement movements are ready to go in. And I should mention that that's not exclusive to quartz movements. That's also done with some brands that sell lower end mechanical watches. So no, I mean, this is kind of a tangential misconception to add to our pile, but you don't always get the same movement back when you send in your lower priced watch. And I've even seen chronometer certified replacement movements. So again, mechanical escapements are no guarantee that your watch and movement will be bound for life. So let's take a look at a few examples of quartz movements that would definitely go back into the case. There's no doubt that the Rolex Oyster Quartz calibers, the first ones were made back in 1977. The date 8 and the date just both, those 5035s and 5055s. Those movements, when they go back to Geneva, they're serviced and they've been serviceable forever. And Rolex built them in a modular form, so the fundamental train, the Swiss lever escapement, the stepper motors, the thermocompensated secondary crystal, the primary crystal, the trimmers, all that was designed for not just the life of the owner, but the life of the watch. And that's a movement that'll be serviced and sent back to you when you send it into Rolex. Or Grand Seiko with the spring drive movements. Whether you're looking at something super high-end, like a 7R in a 9R02, I think, in the SBGZ 001, whether you're looking at something that's Crador level or Micro Artist Studio Grand Seiko, or you're just looking at something like an SBGA 211 Snowflake, the bottom line is that those movements are designed to last, again, not just the life of the owner, but the life of the watch. They'll be serviced, they'll be adjusted, they'll go back, they'll return to you, and they're not disposable movements. The same is true if you want to have a vintage Omega Marine chronometer, a truly high-end quartz watch from the late 70s through early to mid 80s. Well, that's a movement, the caliber 1510, 1511, 1516, that was designed for ultra-premium users. There's a reason that was the most accurate quartz you could buy at the time. It was viewed as a real wrist-borne navigation instrument in the era before GPS. So those are all lifetime quartz movements, and we get the idea that quartz movements, because they're available in many cheap watches that are themselves disposable, quartz movements must always be disposable, and this is just not the fact. There used to be disposable mechanical movements. For the most part, they were one jewel Roscop for pin lever movements, and they sold for 6, 7, 8 Swiss francs, $10 back in the 50s or 60s, and they were designed to be thrown out at the end of their life. But after the quartz crisis, most mechanical watches were premium, they were luxury, they were designed to be lifetime articles. We're kind of returning to the idea of maybe having some disposable mechanicals with the Swatch System 51s, but at the same time, it's been about 7 years since those arrived, and I see some of the earliest examples still running, so they might have more endurance than you think, but that's really the only disposable mechanical movement around today, and we just don't see many of those old-time one-and-done mechanical movements, so we get the idea that they're forever and quartz is disposable, but really it's just a matter of circumstance. There are premium quartz movements out there, you just have to look for them. Okay, another misconception with COSC certified watches. The watches are recertified or tested per the ISO 3159 chronometer standards during a service. No, I don't know of any watch or any brand or any model that is re-COSC certified at the time it goes in for service. Now, some of the really high-end brands might do an extended 6-position or 5-position timing test, but I would be very surprised if even Grubel Forsey does a 2-week, 5-position, 3-temperature test of its watches when they go in for service. So no, your watch is going to be built and regulated to a high standard as originally assembled, and you do need a certain quality of power supply, a certain quality of balance and hairspring and regulator to achieve the COSC test, and that original fabric stays with the watch. But actually redoing the test, I've never heard of that ever. But I do know some people think this happens when watches go in for service. I don't believe it's ever happened in history. Another misconception, which is that factory service is always best. When under warranty, factory service is always best. If a watch is under warranty, send it in, get the warranty service performed, don't go out of pocket, and get a factory warranty on the work and parts that are invested in the watch. But if the watch isn't specifically under warranty, you got to play it by ear. With stuff that is very fine, your Grubel Forcy, your F. Pigeon, your Laurent Ferrier, de Betun, Lange, yeah, you want to send it back to the factory because that's where the experience to work on those watches exists. They also have movement holders that you don't see in the aftermarket, special tools, the parts are all available, and a lot of the people who are servicing the watches built them. But if you're looking at a 1980s Omega Speedmaster, it might not be in your best interest to send that thing in. I've seen old tritium dials swapped out for Luminova, even when the owner specifically requests this not happen. I've seen watches, and I'm not picking on Omega, it happens with all the big brands. I've seen watches that were polished when the owner specifically requested they not be polished, hands replaced, dials replaced, all of that work done unnecessarily, and moreover, it's not as though the knowledge to work on a basic 3135 or ETA 2892 or 2824 is factory specific, or that the tools and the knowledge and the movement parts aren't available generally. When you're dealing with highly specialized stuff, go to the source, but when you're dealing with watches and brands for which the knowledge is broad-based and many independent shops are either certified or well-versed over the years, I don't think that factory is always best. And I'll also mention that with vintage, factory is almost never best. Rolex does a better job than most with that sort of stuff. Apparently, at least in New York, they do have some sort of system where they highlight historically important watches and then put them in a different service track. And I know this because at one point I called them, and incredibly, they took my call and explained this. So bravo to them, but in other cases, it's always best to think of vintage as a world unto itself and seek specialists who are versed in your brand and model. So those are your service misconceptions, and I did my best to hold this thing steady. The phone is trying to fall over, and I have to admit, I have never redone videos in the past, but this phone has fallen 3 times as I've attempted to complete this video. So I am jubilant, having completed ultimately my toughest recording in years. I hope you have a wonderful Monday. I shall see you again with Wake Up with Watches this Wednesday, as ever. Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com if you want to buy anything you see on my social media or our website, and send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at thewatchbox.com. I will be returning to my regularly scheduled time slot, 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern next Monday. Be well, time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.